Bonjour, my name is Alice, welcome back to my channel. Last time we talked about the passport bros trend, putting pressure on Western women to be less demanding, less feminist, otherwise men are gonna leave. Since then, trust me, I've tried my best not to look at the comment section under that video because every time I did, there was a George or Michael wishing me a life of misery and singlehood, and that is not something I personally enjoy reading. But you know what? My past obsession with self-help taught me at least one thing, and that is to turn suffering into success, trauma into a business. And that is what I'm doing, because today's video is sponsored by Squarespace, and I'm going to talk about voluntary singlehood. They lived happily ever after. Yes, I'm making a video on single life, and I start with probably the most romantic quote in the history of pop culture, but for me it made total sense, because I understand this new women-dominated trend as a form of resistance to the romantic imperative. By romantic imperative, I mean this idea we put in girls' heads that love, romance, boy crushes, and eventually marriage and kids are the most important things in their lives. And no, it's not because you saw that viral TikTok of a girl listing all the reasons why she does not want to have children that women don't want to have babies anymore. Internet is not reality. Women are still conditioned to fulfill their maternal duties, and a majority of them still want to find the one, to marry, and potentially have kids. Those gendered norms and expectations that are part of a woman's education have naturally been pointed out in the feminist Bible, The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir, that we'll talk about in a future video. And the reason why I'm making this video today and want to talk about de Beauvoir in the future is because I feel like with the rise of girl boss feminism, choice feminism, the tried wives, etc., we kind of forgot the basics. We forgot that women are still more likely to take care of the house chores, to do the cooking, to plan holidays, to manage their relationships with their partner, but also with the family, with the partner's family, to do plastic surgery, to look good, to remain young, to take care of the kids, obviously, to put their career on pause, to settle down and have babies. And you know what? They're also more likely to regret their life before kids. 51% of French women do. Feminists of the 1960s to 1980s, including Simone de Beauvoir in The Second Sex, were very critical of those societal expectations put on women, precisely because they understood how it limited their lives, their potential as human beings. Feminists condemned the family, domesticity, as the foundation of all those inequalities. The housewife trapped at home in a state of dependence to her husband, repeating the same boring tasks every single day, devoting her life to others, was seen as the embodiment of the oppression of modern women. Now Disney, or the genre of romance in general, managed to romanticize the imperative to find a partner for life, to settle down with, by creating this idea of the Prince Charming. I mean, we all know the typical Disney story. The pure virgin princess is rewarded with a handsome, morally right prince that she'll marry and live forever with. Every Disney story conveniently ends at the "they lived happily ever after," so that we don't know what happened next. Those Disney stories are representative of a world in which divorce was not possible. Back in the old days, a couple had to remain together despite unhappiness, despite sometimes domestic abuse. Even if no-fault divorces are now possible, the pressure to remain together, to fulfill the Disney fantasy, is strong, especially in conservative spheres. You and I, we probably know someone who is in an abusive relationship or marriage, someone who is suffering but feel like they must try harder to make it work when it clearly is destroying them. Women in particular will justify the emotional labor and exhaustion that comes with having crushes, thinking about love, investing a lot of time and effort in a relationship, staying with an abusive boyfriend, by saying that they are hopeless romantic. When in fact, they have been fed with the Disney stories, the coming-of-age stories like After and Twilight, with love songs from One Direction. You don't know you're beautiful. Romance was literally everywhere. And I feel like sometimes we call ourselves romantics or hopeless romantics as a way to relegate all that social conditioning to the personal. It becomes part of our personality, it becomes our problem. Now that doesn't mean that romance does not exist. I don't want to sound pessimistic or anti-romance, don't get me wrong. In fact, some feminists have tried to find a way to value romance, or maybe love would be a better word, while also addressing the way it has been used to encourage heterosexual women to do the emotional labor men won't necessarily do. I'm thinking about bell hooks in All About Love, but I'm also thinking about Mona Chollet, Réinventer l'amour, to reinvent love. I talked about this book in another video last year, if you remember. So in their respective books, both authors look at how patriarchy has made it difficult, almost impossible, for heterosexuals to experience love in an equal way. However, I noticed something in Cholet's book that I didn't immediately realize. It's a pattern I've noticed in recent feminist works that I feel needs to be addressed. So Cholet describes herself as a hopeless romantic, which is something feminists don't usually do, given what we've just explained. It makes sense she does so because she tends to romanticize an ideal past, a sort of they lived happily ever after. I think she believes in soulmates, or at least in an intimate relationship between a man and a woman that lasts forever. However, she understands that the patriarchal Prince Charming story is not compatible with her feminist values. That's why she wrote the book, to show her primarily female readership how patriarchy is preventing them from finding fulfillment in long-term heterosexual relationships. In other words, she wants men to not be problematic, so that being a hopeless romantic, believing in the Disney fantasy, does not mean that she has to sacrifice her feminist values, if that makes sense. But there is nothing truly revolutionary about it. Such a message primarily targets privileged audiences whose feminism does not necessarily extend beyond their personal interest. It ultimately becomes a form of self-help. And I'm not against self-help in feminism, I think it can still be a great tool to raise feminist consciousness. But it's a form of feminism that is imperfect because it seeks to break barriers in some places and maintain barriers in others. In that case, it seeks to break the influence of patriarchy in heterosexual relationships, but it conserves the bourgeois notion of the one partner for life, the family. I say bourgeois notions because the monogamous heterosexual relationship that then becomes the family unit is the foundation of capitalist societies. Capitalism needs the family to survive. That is why, as we spread capitalism across the globe in former colonies, we also forced indigenous populations to colonize to adopt the nuclear family model. It facilitates assimilation, it privatizes care, it regulates female sexuality to favor controlled reproduction. Revolutionaries, including revolutionary feminists, are more often than not family abolitionists. And it makes sense, given what we've just explained. On the other hand, a feminist critic of society that does not question the role of the family is only a reformist. It is more likely to come from people who don't include class in their analysis. So I guess now you understand the potential of voluntary singlehood. I say potential because it is clear to me that most women who join the trend aren't on a mission to, abolish the family, and, it's totally fair. But for some, it's actually quite the contrary. How it can go wrong. Okay, look at these two tweets I found in an article by Abby Moss for ID. The first one is from Auric, a spiritual self-help business, and it says the following: celibacy can change your life. Hold your seed, your life force, and use it to build your legacy and self up. Stop giving away your seed, soul, and life force energy to someone who is not your life partner. You are giving away your coding. Here's another one by God-is. Celibacy is the life for me right now. Being turned off by intimacy exchange is a call for self-preservation and deep healing, taking intentional time to cleanse and return back home to myself so that I may align with the right soul partner, root work. She also recommends to preserve sexual creation energy rather than misplace it. So in those cases, sexuality is presented as something dirty, as the opposite of an ideal of purity, necessary to find the soulmate. She talks about preserving sexual creation energy, and for me that means energy that is meant to create babies. I don't know if that is how it's supposed to be understood. The whole you see it kind of triggered me, not gonna lie. That's what initially came to my mind, because this sort of belief isn't new. In the Constitution of Spartans, philosopher Xenophon also recommended that couples who sought to become parents strengthen their libido by, holding their seed. He didn't say it that way, but you get the point. It was believed that the greater the libido, the mightier the child. And yes, it was in the Constitution because the mightier the child, the mightier the army. This is obviously not scientifically proven, but it nevertheless aligns with religious expectations of purity that circulate on those Instagram, Twitter pages through the language of spirituality. But the difference is that in that case, celibacy is not presented as something one does for God, not even for the state, but rather something that one does for themselves. It is turned into an act of self-love, a term that has become increasingly popular in the past few years, as Google Trends shows us. And I do understand in a way this connection with self-love. I won't deny that there is a great deal of peer pressure to be as active, especially in high school and college, and I understand that getting away from the imperative to have S all the time can feel liberating, can be an opportunity for some to better understand their own sexuality or absence of sexuality. I won't take that away from you, but you must admit that the problem isn't S, but the commodification of S as a social currency, a tool for power, not as an intimate connection with another multiple human beings. The more the merrier, they say. Sex and intimacy coach Lucy Roet said in this ID article I found the tweets in, quote, "Why bother exploring the nuance? How you think about and feel about sex, how you think and feel about your body, emotional patterns you're running, deconstructing societal messages about sex and gender, when you can just teach that sex is bad and dangerous, and the solution to all your issues is just to abstain." End of the quote. That sort of laziness to go to the roots of the problem is what is making celibacy, modesty, and generally speaking conservatism increasingly trendy. So it is important to keep in mind that celibacy and voluntary singlehood or single life are two different things, but yeah, it is easy and for some convenient to mix the two. A recent Guardian article titled "The Rise of Voluntary Celibacy" is a good example of that. It's what made me want to do this video. The journalists put everything into the same basket: religious beliefs with health risks and women's dissatisfying sex lives. It was lazy, and we can't afford to be lazy because some people are going to take advantage of that to push for anti-feminist, conservatives, ideas, and also a return of purity culture. For example, in the tweets we read earlier, the topic of self-love gets reappropriated to convey a very simple, very conservative message. You don't deserve a Prince Charming if you're not a pure princess. Purity is your social currency. How to avoid that? Let's go back to the roots of the voluntary singlehood trend, which is the rejection of societal expectations around love, relationships, and the family. I noticed that those who spoke positively about single life online often talked about how it brought them closer to their friends, and that it helped them to understand that closeness, love, or even sensuality could be experienced in many ways. French philosopher Geoffroy De Lagasnerie goes one step further. He says that doing so refusing to prioritize the family, the couple unit, over friendships, is an act of resistance. Why? Because as we said earlier, we culturally value the family. Our social and economic system cannot function without the family to ensure the duty of care, the regulation of sexuality, and also the passage of wealth from one generation to the next. De Lagasnerie also explains that, for most people, family life isn't as fun as it looks like on TV ads, and that friendship can be a refuge. As an example, Geoffroy spends most of his time with his two best friends, Edouard Louis, that some of you literary people may know, and Didier Ribon, a writer as well. He complains that our society is organized around the family, and he took the example of the series of lockdowns that we went through, during which people were allowed to cross the country to see their families, but couldn't cross the street to go see their friends. Unsurprisingly, almost every time Geoffroy was invited on radio or on TV to present his ideas on friendships, etc., journalists couldn't help but ask him if he and Edouard and Didier were more than friends. They wanted to know if they had sex, which is first, not something you should ask, and second, why do we have to automatically sexualize closeness? Why can we only envision closeness in the context of a romantic or familial relationship? This brings me to this notion of relationship anarchy, which has become increasingly trendy in urban progressive circles. So it's the idea that romantic relationships aren't put on a pedestal in comparison to friendships. It prevents the couple from isolating themselves from their friends like it usually happens when people start dating. Actually, that is partly what motivated Geoffroy De Lagasnerie to write his book titled 3, referring to his friendship trio with Edouard and Didier. His vision of close relationships is one that is turned outwards, towards the community. You know, friends bring new friends, there's always something new to learn, something new to discover. On the other hand, a traditional couple tends to prioritize activities together and progressively isolate themselves from others. It's not always the case, but it's a general trend, and I'm sure you've noticed this around you as well. Now, in urban progressive circles, relationship anarchy is a choice, something people do as a form of resistance against the traditional heterosexual relationships, against the family. But in other circles, relationship anarchy is just a reality. In fact, in working class communities, in low-income areas, the nuclear family isn't as common as it is among middle classes. Single mothers, children with absent fathers must often rely on a network of relatives, friends to support themselves and grow. Those broken families are generally heavily criticized, heavily stigmatized in corporate media. They are used as an example of what should not be done in terms of sexuality or family structures, etc. But in France, political consultant and author Fatma Ouassak has turned a weakness into a strength. She has flipped the media narrative to show that what they describe as a broken family is in fact an opportunity for experimentation. So she has helped forge a collective of working class mothers and even created a center for sustainability within her community, slightly outside Paris, in a place that is often stigmatized because of its diversity and low-income population. The center is called Vert Dragon. It is made of an alternative school, a collective kitchen, a place to let kids be creative. They also organize events. They are a sort of city within a city, a concept that reminds me of what the Black Panther Party used to do in the US. The Panthers were also located in diverse low-income neighborhoods in large cities. They created their own schools, free health clinics, and free food programs, etc. The goal was to share the duty of care among the community because the family, oftentimes the mother, could not provide all that care by herself. Unsurprisingly, the Panther centers, including the clinics, were attacked by local police under the control of the FBI. Similarly, the Vert Dragon project in Bagnolet has been the victim of the attacks coming from the right, including members of the government because of its capacity to self-govern outside traditional institutions. Opponents are scared that a project like Vert Dragon works and grows because it would mean that the nuclear family isn't essential. To conclude, voluntary singlehood, pro-single life content promotes a detachment from the traditional monogamous couple and, generally speaking, the nuclear family. It is an opportunity to reevaluate the way we do relationships, the hierarchy we create between romance and friendships. But it can also be prey to conservative appropriation because single life gets mixed up with celibacy and self-love gets used to serve purity culture. So we have to be careful, we have to ask the right questions and avoid the lazy answers, the ones that aren't challenging, therefore the ones that are conservative. We also have to continue to learn from those who have rejected traditional norms of relationships by default and see how we can inspire each other to build a future in which community becomes the family. That is it for today. I hope you enjoyed it. It's so hot in here, I can't do it anymore. As always, the conversation continues in the comment section. Don't forget to like, to subscribe if it's not already done. I would like to thank my Patreons for their support, and a special thank to top tier Patreons Rémi, Trébizonde, Toki, Corrigi, Tristan, Patricia, Christopher, Ian, Donage, Ren, Alex, Sam, Manuel, Dakota, Benjamin, Perry, and Carla. Before I leave, I need to talk to you about our dear sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace is an all-in-one platform for building your brand and growing your business online. You can create your own website around your preferred aesthetic from a catalog of templates and use it as a landing platform for all the activity you do: YouTube, online shop, blog, podcast, photography, etc. Once that is set up, you can connect all your social media accounts and share content between different platforms. Squarespace can also help you create effective email campaigns to really connect with your community. Finally, they have this very cool feature where you can connect and learn from other creators like Adrien Raquel, who will show you how you can best use the platform. If you feel like Squarespace is made for you and you want to check it out, go to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you've experimented and you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/alice.cappelleyt to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thank you, Squarespace, for sponsoring the video. Thank you all for watching till the end, and yeah, I'll see you very soon. Salut!